Here we're going to take a look at solving quadratic equations. So there are a couple ways, actually several ways that I could solve those. In this video, we're going to focus on two. That is factoring and the square root property. Now, when we're doing factoring to solve a quadratic equation, we're using something called the zero product principle. This is something you're familiar with even if you don't know it by name. It's basically if something times something is zero, then one of my somethings has to be zero, because the only way to multiply and get a result of zero is to have zero somewhere in there. This works whether I am multiplying 2 things or 10 things, but I have to have a zero in there somewhere. Okay, so when I'm going to use factoring as a method to solve quadratic equations, I have to make sure I have it equal to zero, because this doesn't work for anything else. So in my example here, I have 2x squared minus x equals 3. There's no zero. I have to subtract the 3, move it to the other side, then I can do my factoring. All right, so factoring is considered a prerequisite skill for this class, but that doesn't mean you might not have questions or be a little weaker in certain areas. That's okay. Just be sure that you reach out to me or you contact the Academic Success Center so that we can help get you up to speed and sharpen those skills so that you can do the work of this course. Real quickly here then, I have 2x squared minus x minus 3. I don't have anything in common, so I'm going to start with my 2 parentheses. What goes in these first 2 spots multiplies to give me the first term, 2x and x. What goes in the last 2 spots has to multiply and give me a negative 3. I chose negative 3 and positive 1. Someone might say, well, why can't we do plus 3 and negative 1? The answer is because I have to consider the middle term. If I take this outer product, positive 2x, and this inner product, negative 3x, and combine them, they're supposed to give me what the middle term is, and in this case it does. It gives me a negative x. So always remember, check that outer product and inner product to make sure you get the right middle term, not just the right number, but the right sign on that. Okay, so now I have something times something is 0. I set each of my somethings equal to 0 and solve 2 very simple linear equations. Let's take a look at another one. If I have 4x squared equals 49, again, there's no 0, so I can move it to one side and say 4x squared minus 49. Now, in this case, I don't have a middle term. And I noticed something kind of unique about those 2 numbers. They're both perfect square numbers. Oh, right. There is that thing called difference of squares. So as soon as I see I have 2 perfect square numbers and there's a minus, I'm going to use the difference of squares way to factor. That means square root, 2x and 2x, square root, 7 and negative 7, and I do have a plus and a minus. So this way the outer and inner terms will cancel, and I will get my 2 terms, 4x squared minus 49. Once again, you set each of those factors equal to 0, and then you solve the resulting equations and get our 2 final answers. All right, could I have solved this another way? Absolutely. We could have used something called the square root property or the square root principle. So if you have x squared equal to a number, that means x is equal to either the positive square root of that or the negative square root. We are going to get 2 answers, okay? It is important that whatever is being squared is isolated before you take that square root. So here's an example similar to the one we just worked. If I have 3x squared minus 48, they're not perfect squares here. I could try to factor this if I wanted to, or I could say, you know what? Let's just move that 48 over. Let's divide through by the 3 so that I've isolated the x squared part. Now that it's isolated, I can take the square root, and when I'm writing this on paper, I'm always going to put that plus minus to remind myself 2 answers, and I know the square root in this case, so I get a 4 and negative 4. So what about checking our answers? Well, we can plug them in directly into the original problem, and you can also use your calculator. So if I have my equation equal to 0, all I'm going to do is do 3x squared minus 48. And my answers are, I think, 4 and negative 4 in the standard window, so I'm just going to go ahead and keep it in the standard window and graph this. What I'm going to see, I don't see the whole thing, but it is a parabola that's graphed. And what I'm checking for is where am I equal to 0 here? It looks like it's crossing at -4 and 4. I can confirm that by hitting trace. Let's put in -4. And sure enough, it tells me the y is 0. And same thing for the 4, y is 0. So you can plug in directly and do the arithmetic, or you can graph it and verify the zeros. We'll check out other methods of solving quadratics in another video.